You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I am a real African enthusiast. I absolutely love the continent of Africa. I've been privileged to live in more than one country. So I did that strategy document and they invested £8,000. And now that's an over £800,000 business. I would say 99.9% of our customers are British companies that have a presence in Africa and looking to expand across the continent. I mean, when we first opened, doing business in Africa was not on anybody's radar at all. I mean, they weren't really thinking about export as much as they are now.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. This episode, we have a very special guest. We have the most powerful woman in Africa market entry, who is the Managing Director and Chief Africa Enthusiast at ETK, Bolaji Sofoluwe. Welcome to the podcast, Bolaji. How are you?
I'm very well, Tessa. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm so excited.
It's great to have you on the podcast. During my intro, I tried to not give too much away, so feel free to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Bolaji and ETK Group.
Okay, so my name is Bolaji Sofoluwe, and I'm the Managing Director of the Enterprise Trade and Knowledge Group. I jokingly tell people that my name is Boss because actually my initials spell out boss. So I was born to be a boss.
Fantastic.
ETK has been around for the last 11 years and I've been working there since then. I used to be Director of Business Development and Strategy. I am a real Africa enthusiast. I absolutely love the continent of Africa. I've been privileged to live in more than one country in Africa, so I'm very familiar with the local environment, cultural nuances and the rest of it. So it really helps me do my work at ETK. So I absolutely love being the Chief Africa Enthusiast at ETK.
Fantastic. As you mentioned, or as I believe, ETK celebrated its 10th anniversary last year, so congratulations on that amazing achievement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you started ETK 10 years ago when doing business in Africa or investing in Africa wasn't even a consideration for most companies. What did you see then that most people were missing?
So that's a really interesting question. At the time, what we found was that a lot of people were asking us about the opportunities on the continent. So it was really mostly diaspora who were hearing about the great business opportunities out there and were asking us if we could help with setting them up, whatever kind of business it was, you know. I think the first person to approach me wanted to set up a poultry farm in Port Harcourt in Nigeria, and asked me to please help with the strategy document. And so I did that strategy document and they invested, I think it was at the time, £8,000. And now that's an over £800,000 business. Wow. So I think, you know, just the excitement of being in, you know, having the opportunity to participate in the business environment in Africa was very attractive to diaspora. And so I actually started that way, just doing strategy plans for people who are looking at going into the continent.
So you mentioned your early customers or early clients were from the diaspora. In terms of percentage-wise, is a large percentage of your client base still from the African diaspora?
No, not at all. In fact, it's really interesting how that has completely flipped. At the moment, we now have, I would say 99.9% of our customers are British companies that probably have a presence in Africa and looking to expand across the continent. And the 0.1 also that's left are Africans in diaspora that either work for large organizations that are entering the African market or are looking to establish businesses themselves. Because as you know, the startup scene is very exciting out there. So it's actually grabbing the attention of a lot of Africans that live overseas, not just the UK, but in the US, in Europe, you know, are really interested in looking at what they can do there. So now we're beginning to get a little bit more interest, but interestingly enough, our client base is mostly British, US, or European businesses.
So through the 10 years, you've seen a change in, I guess, the makeup of your client base. So would you say people's perspective or people's perception of doing business in Africa has changed, and how has it changed through the years?
Oh, yes. I mean, when we first opened, doing business in Africa was not on anybody's radar at all. I mean, we were just coming out of a global recession.
Yes.
You know, people were focusing on building their own businesses in their own local markets. They weren't really thinking about export as much as they are now. Because obviously, before you export to a different market, you have to have a solid base in your home market. And I think a lot of these businesses at the time were just trying to survive. We're just trying to get through every day, a bit like now with the combination of Brexit and COVID, you know. So at that time, you know, it wasn't as attractive. So even for us, it was very much an ad hoc kind of, you know, we're getting clients once in a while. You might get a client today and not get another one for 3 months. But eventually, we started to grow the business, and companies started going from looking inward to looking outward. What was out there? What markets could they enter into? And the risk appetite also increased. So we were getting a few more inquiries about going into Africa, and it's just continued to grow steadily since then.
So you mentioned people's perception or approach change in terms of looking outwards instead of inwards. So from the other perspective, on the continent, how have people's perceptions changed with regards to doing business with international companies coming into Africa?
That's an interesting question again, Tessa. So I would say that's a really strange dynamic that has evolved over time. I think there was a defensiveness at first to say, you guys, particularly with British businesses, it was like you guys just upped and left the continent and left us in a bit of a state. Now that we are building ourselves up again, you want to come and take over opportunities in the continent. That sounds a bit controversial, but that is exactly the kind of reaction I was getting from potential partners and businesses on the ground. And then that started to change gradually, because I think the perception of the businesses on this side started to change. They started to see their African counterparts as partners. They started to see their African counterparts as people that they could form long-term relationships with, as opposed to just sell, if you know what I mean, which was the previous model. It was just, okay, someone goes to the continent with a bunch of flyers in their briefcase and, you know, wows everyone out there. I think that perception also changed as new countries started to look at Africa. Turkey started getting more interested in the continent. China, as you know, has great influence across the continent. So obviously, a lot of businesses were spoilt for choice as to who they could work with. That has really changed the perception of businesses, particularly in the West, as to how they deal with African markets. I think that's really had an evolution over the years.
Fantastic. So if we could kind of expand on that, obviously perceptions, if it's a negative perception, can be a challenge to doing business internationally. So what are some of the common challenges that you see international companies face when doing business in Africa?
I think one of the common challenges is just the cultural differences.
Yes.
You know, understanding the local way of doing business is something that is excruciatingly different from country to country.
It is.
And because Africa is looked at holistically a lot of times, especially when company boards are looking at strategy around the continent, they sort of appoint someone to handle EMEA. What does that even mean? No disrespect to those who have that in their title, but it just doesn't make sense to me, because it's such a continent with different markets. And even in one country, the way business is conducted in the south of that country can be very different to the way business is conducted in the north. And so I think there's a more sophisticated approach to the continent that I think businesses sort of need to adopt and approach. And I think one of the major challenges is looking at Africa as a holistic market.
So you gave a fantastic tip there in terms of how to navigate or understand the cultural differences or nuances within African markets. So what other tips or pieces of advice would you give to international companies that are looking to enter the African market?
Well, first of all, there was something that a client once said to me that really made me quite interested. He said, I want to look at Africa in cities, not in countries. I absolutely loved that because
Fantastic.
he knew exactly what taking the continent apart meant. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I was very impressed that he had already started thinking that way. And I think that's one of the greatest tips. Look at cities, look at individual cities as you're developing your strategy. That's number one. Number two, we have something at ETK called the Opportunity Index, where we map out markets that would be most attractive to our clients, looking at various factors. There are different data points, different parameters, different definitions that we've used and that we've developed over time that we use to actually define what markets would be best for a specific product or service. And that really helps our clients understand sort of what the local market looks like, what the opportunities are, and just helps a client develop and adapt a strategy that works for them, because no two companies are the same. So you might find the industries are the same, you might find the products are the same, but actually every company has their own DNA. So it has to not just match the market, but it also has to match the specific product or service that that company produces. The other thing I would say that's a top tip is, again, don't assume that people are not doing what you're doing on the ground. Do a proper competitive study, because not only are you finding companies from all over the world looking at participating in Africa, what you're also finding is that Africans are finding solutions to African problems. There's a lot of innovation going on in the continent. So don't assume that your product or your service is going to absolutely be the savior of that specific sector or industry. It's very, very likely that someone's thought about what you're doing. So do your research from the perspective of finding out what is available locally, how that can be improved by your product or service, or how you can actually invest in or partner with companies that are doing what you do. Those are my two top tips.
That's fantastic advice. And thank you for giving us insight into what ETK does and how you work with your clients. So I was wondering if we can kind of expand or go deeper into that. I'm going to be quite blunt. Why should a company come and work with you? What are the benefits of working with a company such as ETK?
Oh, I didn't know I was going to do this. I didn't know I was pitching.
It's not a pitch.
I thought I was just going to talk about unlocking Africa. So, what we always say to our clients is that we're authentic in what we do. We've got boots on the ground. We're not just some consultancy outfit that's sitting in the UK sort of trying to determine what works best on the continent. It doesn't work that way. We learn from our teams as much as our teams learn from us. We've got people on the ground who've been doing this with us for the last 11 years. Our team is superb. We don't only scratch the surface of market expansion. We actually look at things like sustainability. So we've got an ESG monitoring practice within the organization that can also help with areas like that. It's an end-to-end service provision. Not only do we provide strategy, we provide implementation. So one of our smallest projects actually was in Zimbabwe, and it was delivering tender documents to the examination board out there. So all we had to do was print off all these tender documents that had been sent to us by our clients in the UK, and we just had to get them in an envelope and get them submitted on time to the examination board. But that's how granular we are and can be. We can roll up our sleeves and do work for our clients, even with all the fancy qualifications that we've all got.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that piece of insight and give us a bit more information or visibility into how ETK operates. I was thinking we can slightly flip it and go in a whole different direction. One thing I think we've kind of spoken about over the years is every year we always see things with great anticipation in terms of review the World Bank's ease of doing business rankings, and we see massive improvements from African countries, and you see all these headlines in terms of Africa going in a positive direction, which is good. How has this affected the way that ETK operates on the continent? Has it genuinely become easier for companies to do business on the continent? Have you found there's been a change or a shift in the way you actually operate on the ground or on the continent?
Well, first of all, with all due respect to the wonderful World Bank and the great institution that it is, that ease of doing business index is just, for me, not very relatable in the reality that is on the ground, when you're on the ground trying to do business. Whilst I find that some of the measurements that they use are quite useful, I don't really think it can translate into something that a company can use as a roadmap to entering the market, really, because sometimes, countries show institutions such as the World Bank what they want to see as opposed to what the reality is. And I think,
I get that.
I would personally recommend that even if it's not ETK, so obviously I would pitch ETK first, but even if it's not us and there's another consultancy, always ask the people who are on the ground what is actually happening in the various areas that you choose to look at, or the various areas that would help you participate in a specific market. There's nothing like local intelligence where it comes to Africa. You can't find everything on the internet.
Very true.
And so that's one thing I would say is my golden nugget. You just need to get your feet on the ground and understand exactly how the market works.
Fantastic. So if we can stick with the theme of how ETK operates in Africa, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement launched on the 1st of January 2021. How has this changed the way you operate in Africa, obviously in terms of where you position yourself currently and how you plan to position yourself in the future?
So the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is actually a thing that really excites us here at ETK, only because it presents a very different set of opportunities for our clients that are trying to get into the market. I would say to start with, it brings a great opportunity for an industrial, if you like, revolution on the continent, because if you're manufacturing in one country, you can then export that product into the other markets seamlessly. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. And so we're quite excited about advising our clients to have a longer term approach to Africa generally, because obviously the opportunities will just keep getting better and better. And the free movement of people, ideas, goods and services can only be a good thing for the continent. Look at what it did to the EU. It made the EU a bloc that was worth reckoning with, a bloc that attracted better investment opportunities. And we're already seeing that in Africa. So, I think what's going to happen is that you're going to see quite a lot of longer term patient capital going into the continent on infrastructure projects, on sort of all the institutions and the things that would help the free continental trade area work. We've already seen the payment system that's recently been launched between countries. So you can see that there is actually a will to make this succeed. And there's a lot of optimism here at ETK and with our teams on the ground as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Bolaji. And if we can continue sticking with this theme in terms of how you operate within Africa, because I'm very interested in terms of the market entry and market expansion. Obviously, at the moment, we can't ignore the dreaded C word, COVID. How has the pandemic influenced or changed the way you operate in Africa? Has it impacted the appetite of international companies wanting to enter the African market?
No.
That's good to hear.
So actually, in the first 2 years of COVID, because believe it or not, we've been 2 years in on this terrible pandemic, we actually saw a surge of business opportunities and activity for the continent, mainly because, again, this arm's length approach to doing business in Africa had to be ditched, because it was impossible to do that when there was a global pandemic and people needed to get boots on the ground. And then people became there was more innovation happening on the continent. Last year alone, we saw $5 billion in startup investments, particularly in the tech area in Africa. And so I think it was a great thing for the continent because, like I said, again, Africa solutions to Africa problems. I was speaking to someone who held the franchise for a watchmaker, a very internationally acclaimed watchmaker for Nigeria. And he said that at the time, what was happening is that people were importing parts and manufacturing watches locally and selling them locally as well. So people were buying Nigerian more than they were because they couldn't travel and because they couldn't leave the country. So, there was so much more opportunities in the manufacturing sector. So I think that it's revived Africa. It's revived Africa's manufacturing industry. It has actually revived people's sense of innovation. It has revived people's sense of solution. And I just think it's been very good for the continent. And for us, we just keep getting inquiries for Africa because people are more interested in entering the market. So yeah, it's been good, and I'm not going to downplay the effects that COVID has had economically to some of the biggest markets in Africa. I wouldn't downplay that at all. But I will say that it has definitely opened doors for other opportunities across the continent as well.
So you mentioned that you've seen an increase in terms of inquiries, business, people wanting to go into the continent during the pandemic. So I'm sure you frequently approach with people that have new brilliant products that they believe are suitable for the African market. So how do you go about determining whether or not their product is suitable for the African market?
Well, you've got to test the market, haven't you?
I hope so.
You've got to test the market. I mean, one of the major deterrents for people is that they have to get quite a lot of certifications before they can actually legally sell that product in the market. So it's very difficult to test markets when you need to go through quite a lot of regulatory protocols to actually get the product out there. However, ETK has developed means and ways that you can test a very small sample of the market to see how the product is received, to see how it stands up against the competition, and just to see what sort of marketing and promotion needs to be done for those specific products. So again, same thing goes for services. There's only one way of actually finding out. Again, I mentioned a lot earlier, a competitive study. You totally need to do that. I find a lot of clients come to us sometimes and say, can we just skip that bit and can you just get my product into the market? And then when it doesn't sell, they come back to us and say, but my product isn't selling in the market. I'm like, well, you didn't want to commission full market research. Oh, but we did some in-house. Well, did you actually go to the market to do that research, and these are some of the things that we're trying to make sure that we stand our ground. Every time a client comes to us, we stand our ground and say, we're not going to take your product in until we know whether or not this product is going to do well in the market or this service is going to do well in the market. So I think that's the main thing. You've just got to test it.
So you touched upon the clients sometimes wanting to skip out vital steps when conducting market entry research or testing the market. What are some of the other kind of common misconceptions that international companies have about doing business in Africa?
That no one else is doing it.
Yes, that their product is the only product out there.
That's the main thing, and what really interests is that a lot of these companies are constantly researching their local markets. They're constantly doing customer surveys. They invest heavily in ensuring that the product suits the market. They invest heavily in making sure they can innovate and change and adapt their product to suit the market better. But they just don't seem to feel the need to do it when they're trying to get into Africa. And I think that's, for me, is one of the major issues that we always have to deal with. It's making sure the clients that we meet with, are willing to actually invest in producing on purpose, if you like. And we actually had a roadshow to that effect with the Barclays Bank a couple of years ago, where we went round talking to people about innovating and producing for Africa on purpose. For us, that's really one of the crucial elements. It might be that you've got a 50 ml bottle of something, but actually in Africa, in order to sell it, it's got to be 25 ml, or it's got to be 100 ml to get value for money. So again, it's really thinking through some of these things and letting a client make up their own minds as to whether or not they're ready for the continent or not. And I think that will be the main thing.
Thank you for that. So I'm assuming how clients approach you, they probably come via your extensive network, social media, your website. So when I was looking on your website, it says that ETK, you're the enterprise expansion expert to and across Africa. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What does it mean specifically to you?
Well, what does it mean to me? There's no way of answering this question without sounding a bit, braggy. But I have to say we are the market leaders. We were there before everyone else. We know what it is that we do. We know how we do it. When I say enterprise expansion, it's exactly what it says on the tin. We will help you get into new African markets. It's not as straightforward as a lot of people think. You can't just say you're going to Africa and you're only in Lagos. You're not even in Nigeria properly if you're in Lagos.
Yes.
So it's really about breaking things down for our clients and making sure that if they do say they're expanding across Africa, they are. And if they are selling the African dream, particularly to private equity investors, etc., who are saying, oh, we've just invested in Africa. No, you haven't. You've just invested in Nigeria, or you've just invested in Kenya, or you've just invested in Egypt. So if you have invested in Egypt, say so, rather than say you've invested in Africa. But if your desire is to invest in Africa, then working with a company like ETK will make that happen, because not only are we present in many of these African countries, have done projects in 32. We can also tell you what regulatory barriers you're going to experience and all of that. And we can allow you to set realistic timelines as to when you can actually enter these markets and how soon you can expand across the market. So these are the things that ETK brings to the table. We're experts in this area, only because we've done it so long and we've only focused on this niche market.
You certainly are experts. During the answer, you kind of touched upon helping companies expand across Africa. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you've helped companies to successfully enter over 30 African markets.
32.
Fantastic. Brilliant.
And we're on our 33rd at the moment. So hopefully when we're done, we can say 33.
Brilliant. That's great to hear. So I just wanted to understand, how was this achieved, as you are a UK company and based in the UK? How do you manage to achieve all of this whilst being based in the UK in terms of helping clients or companies enter over 30 African markets?
Okay, so let's just say at the very beginning, I used to say to people that I was based at 40,000 feet. Because there was a lot of traveling involved. I literally had a go bag. I would have to get on a plane quite a lot. It was a very stressful time at the beginning of the business. I'm not even going to go into an entrepreneur's journey because we haven't got enough time. But I have to tell you that establishing relationships on the ground cannot be done virtually. I can tell you right now.
True.
You've got to look someone in the eye. You've got to have a meal with them. In the case of Kenya, I had a lot of meat in a wonderful restaurant called Carnivore somewhere in Nairobi. Please, vegans, don't come for me. And I sat down with my partner there, maybe 7 years ago, and we set up the practice out in Nairobi from then on, and we've been waxing strong since. And from our Nairobi office, we've done Uganda, we've done Rwanda, we've done Tanzania, we've done Ethiopia. So again, it's really about establishing those strong relationships on the ground and teaching, training on our processes here at ETK. There's a process for everything at ETK.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Fantastic.
I think it's a little bit of OCD of the directors, actually. But because we know Africa can be quite challenging, we are still very flexible about our processes. But it's worked for us over the years, and it's what's helped us expand safely. That's how it happened, really. So I don't think any company has the capacity that we have at the moment, not just in terms of number of countries, but in terms of the process and the know-how to make it successful as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for detailing how you managed to successfully assist or enable companies to go into different African markets. So I'm assuming when companies approach you to go to Africa, they have an idea of a kind of locality, a region, or a specific African market that they want to go to. So what I'm thinking is, how can African countries go about increasing the awareness of investment or trade opportunities in their countries so that they attract more international interest?
So I was having a conversation with one of my friends who works at the Commonwealth Secretariat. I would say friend, but she's somebody who I've worked with for a few years now, has sort of become a friend. And I was telling her just how I would really love to have a long session with some of the trade desk officers in the African embassies here in the UK. Because when we are selling in Africa as the UK, DIT, we are UK PLC. We're selling what is great about Britain and what's great about what people can buy from Britain. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Or what is great about investing in Britain? And I think that's kind of what needs to happen with some of these trade attaches in the embassies. They need to be having roadshows. They need to be engaging business here in the UK. They need to be they need to be proactive about it. One of my greatest concerns is that most times it does feel like it's a bit of a cap in hand approach, where it's always about come and invest in our country. And I've been to a few presentations from some of the embassies, and I won't name them, where they're talking more about the beaches and the beautiful climate. A businessman wants to know what's in it for him. So the standard of presentation needs to change. The perception needs to change. Africa needs a PR machine that they don't currently have, because the opportunities are endless. You know, we hear different things every single day at ETK HQ that people can be getting involved in. So why aren't the embassies talking about that a little bit more? And for me, I just think that's one of the things that I think really needs to improve, just the way Africa is sold and Africa is pitched to international markets.
Brilliant. So you've kind of touched upon this, but I was thinking if we could go a bit deeper in terms of what specifically can African governments do to continue improving their ability to attract international business to invest in Africa. You know, is there anything specific in terms of what they can do for the future to maintain that kind of stability or flow?
Are you going to get me started on this one, Tessa? Seriously.
Feel free to get started.
Have we got all evening? Well, I think first things first, what they need to do, like I said earlier, is they need to get more business-like and commercial about their markets. They need to understand that actually running a country can very much be like running a business for the sake of their people, making sure that that economic growth is consistent. And it's not unachievable on the continent. They need to invest in infrastructure. You know, why are they waiting around for institutions like the World Bank to dictate how easy it is to do business in their countries? Let them sit together, have a think tank, and determine exactly how to make things easier for people to do business in a country. For instance, you know, there are certain countries, I will not name them, just getting to the airport will make you want to just run for the hills once you arrive there. And I think it's things like this that we need to, practical things like this that we need to be thinking about. And don't get me wrong, as you know, I love my continent. Like literally, when I get off the plane, I kiss the ground, because anywhere I land, whether that be Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Nigeria, wherever it is that I arrive at, I just get a sense of home, you know, there as well. England is my home as well as Africa is my home. But I just think that we need to be more proactive and we need to be more business-like about the way we run our countries. It shouldn't just be about power grabbing and having influence in our local markets. We can have influence internationally. And I'm always drawn back to the evidence that is in Singapore and the way that country was turned around. And I think it's definitely possible for Africa to do the same.
Well, thank you for painting a very realistic and practical picture in terms of Africa's future, and I guess some very beautiful pieces of insight regarding how we can position the continent going forward. So if we stick on that theme in terms of future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from basically what you do? Where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from that perspective?
Well, if we take a little bit of attention away from the buzz and the excitement of everything we're hearing about, new African unicorns and investment, mostly, you know, sort of Silicon Valley investment that's happening on the continent at the moment. If you just take our eyes away from that for a second, and just imagine the fact that there is a new Africa rising. I know that a lot of people have been a bit disillusioned lately, especially with the socio-political circumstances in countries like Mali and in Guinea and all of those markets that we felt that there was some stability coming to. There are issues around terrorism and all of these other things. I still think that Africa's private sector has literally decided to create its own ecosystem, to create its own infrastructure, to create its own opportunities. And this is what's going to turn the continent around. It's almost existing outside of the political system at the moment, except for where, regulatory compliance is needed. You find that the private sector is standing on one side and the public sector is standing on the other side. And I feel that's a very interesting dynamic that's emerging. But I think, look at America just a few centuries ago. I was reading a really interesting book the other day, and I was just hearing about how Ford Motors had to be in the business of road building in those days because the government just did not have the resources to do so. That's what I see in Africa now, market-making opportunities that will completely transform the continent. And I think 5 to 10 years' time, we would actually start seeing cities transforming right before our very eyes. And I think people really need to make the most of the opportunity now.
Wow, that's amazing. If we lead on from that, I guess most importantly, where do you see yourself and ETK Group in 5 years' time?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I'm very keen on building this business as a mega consultancy company, specifically focused on Africa. I think for very long, the big three, they've taken the stage for a long time in doing business on the continent. But I think, why not ETK? We're only a small business, but I really foresee just the way we started. They say start as you want to go on.
Yes.
And the way we started in building these foundations, really solid foundations, we can build a skyscraper. So we're really excited about the next 5 to 10 years. I see this company growing in leaps and bounds. I see our expansion across the continent growing in leaps and bounds. I see us being that go-to company for all Africa's largest corporate businesses for setting up and expanding into new markets. And I'm really excited about our future.
Well, having worked with you in the past, I totally believe that you will achieve that and even bigger things in the years to come.
Thank you.
So thank you for
Thank you, Tessa.
So thank you for that, Bolaji.
Thank you so much for interviewing me. I'm always nervous about these things, but hey, talking to you is always such a pleasure, Tessa.
We haven't finished yet.
Oh, have we not?
No, I'm not letting you go yet.
Quote of the week.
So this is a feature that I've kind of continued for each episode. So, as people, we often have quotes, mantras, or, as Africans, we have African proverbs that keep us going when times are hard. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Gosh.
Or you can check your phone.
I have two, actually. I have two, actually. I'm trying to pick one. There's one that I pinned. So this is not mine, actually. But there's one that I always have as a pin on my Twitter account. And there are never any traffic jams on the extra mile. I think this is something that's always guided me through life, especially when I'm working with my clients, when I'm looking after my family, because I'm a mom, I'm a wife, so I always go the extra mile for my husband and children. I go the extra mile for my extended family, for my friends, and I just think that's something that I've always lived by, that there are never any traffic jams on the extra mile.
Beautiful. I do like that one. And funny enough, I've never heard it before.
Oh, okay. It's Brian Tracy. Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Really like it. Yeah.
Yes, I've never heard that one before. I might actually pinch it. So, as we're coming to the end of the conversation, do you have any closing remarks and final calls to action?
Well, one of the things I would always say to people is get out there, buy a ticket, get on a plane and go out there. Go and see for yourself what's happening on the continent. Go and get a bit of that extra vibe, the juice that you would get on the streets of Nairobi or Johannesburg or Lagos or Dakar. Get out there and see what's happening. And you wouldn't need an ETK to convince you after that. You would just go in.
So true. Yep. I couldn't agree more. You have to see it for yourself, experience it, smell it, hear it, and you understand what it's all about. Get out there. I think that's such a great way to close today's conversation. So I guess thank you, Bolaji, for giving us your valuable time and sharing so much knowledge and insight that you've built over the 10 years working and running ETK. So yeah, beautiful. Thank you a lot, Bolaji. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Tessa, for inviting me. Such an honor. Thank you.
And I'm sure we will speak soon. Thank you, Bolaji. Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.